Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Lauren Clossy, and I am the Continuing Education Consultant for the State Library of North Carolina, and I will be your host today. For our session entitled Positive Pivots, How Libraries Became More Accessible Because of the COVID-19 Pandemic and Where We Go From Here. This event is supported through funding from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat and interact with other attendees and the speakers within the Whova app for this presentation. And now I'd like to introduce to you our speakers, Babak, Zarin, and Kaitlyn Hodges. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Lauren. Like she said, my name is Kaitlyn Hodges. I am the Disability Services Librarian at the Virginia Beach Public Library. My pronouns are she and her, and you can contact me using the email on this slide. And I'll turn it over to my co-presenter.
Hi, I'm Babak Zarin. I'm the Access Services Librarian at the Central Rappahannock Regional Library. My pronouns are he, him, and you can also contact me by the email embedded in this slide. So just to give everyone some general expectations, the presentation is about 60 minutes long. Kaitlyn and I will be talking for approximately 40 minutes, and then there will be a brief reset pause. This is a practice that comes out of conferences for those on the autism spectrum. And basically, this is a 1-minute pause in the presentation. Kaitlyn and I will not be speaking, but you can get up, get a snack, get something to drink, check on the kids, walk the dog, go to the bathroom, whatever it is you need to do during this time so that you can come back to the presentation, with full attention. And then the remainder will be approximately 20 minutes of questions and conversation.
Okay, to begin, we're going to discuss the challenges prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. There were definitely many of them, and a lot of them are covered within these groups: the physical and virtual environment, communication, transportation, and acceptance and belonging. The last two are pretty self-explanatory, so we're going to dive a little deeper into the first two and tell y'all possible solutions now that a lot of the programming is a little bit more in person than it was back in like March of 2020. Solutions are easy, but were often forgotten or ignored prior to the pandemic. So for the physical space, there have been issues for people with disabilities getting into the library. That is things such as the parking, the stairs, and the doors. For parking, it's important to have one handicapped space for every 25 parking spots. And the space must be 8 feet wide with an 8 feet aisle and be on a hard level surface. There also must be adequate signage indicating where the handicap spaces are. And if there's a curb, the curb cut must be near the building entrance. For the stairs, if the building has more than one level, you should have an accessible elevator. The stairs should be at least 36 inches wide and have handrails, as well as non-slip and no more than 11 inches high. For the doors, the door opening should be at least 36 inches wide and should be easily opened. The thresholds cannot be more than 1/4 inches high, and you should label inaccessible entrances and provide directions to accessible entrances. I'm sure y'all are going to notice a pattern with this. 36 inches is essentially the minimum to be accessible. But libraries, as we are evolving, need to do our best to try to go a little bit above and beyond the minimum for sure. There were also challenges moving through the space. That includes things like signage, floors, paths, elevators, and furniture. Signs, they need to be large, readable, and not too high for people in wheelchairs. They also need to have Braille on them if possible, and must be placed at a height where people could actually read the Braille. As a side note, do not frame the Braille. That makes it completely useless. And unfortunately, my co-presenter has actually seen that happen before. The floors, they should be flat and smooth without debris or obstacles and not in loud colors. The path should be smooth with a hard surface and no obstacles. It should also be at least 36 inches wide and have a ramp if necessary. Finally, for this section, the furniture, it needs to be 40 inches of clear space around it, and tables should have 27 inches high clearance and 19 inches of depth underneath. Another side note is the lighting. It should be strong, uniform, and glare-free. And the walls shouldn't be in a dark color. It's just much easier to see things if it's bright and airy. There were also challenges with accessing materials, such as periodicals, the stacks, and the computer catalog. For the public access catalogs and the computer stations, they should have at least 36 inches of clear space around them and should be accessible for those who would sit in front of them. So there needs to be plenty of space. They need to be in a good spot. All the things that you think come naturally, you should just put that into practice. The periodicals and stacks, the top row of periodicals should not be more than 48 inches high. There should be a sign indicating that you can ask for assistance if you can't reach an item, or have 36 to 42 inch aisles in the stacks area. And then finally, for finding locations, that includes things like the checkout station, reference, help desk, and most importantly, restrooms. For the checkout, the counter needs to be 36 inches high and at least 36 inches long. For reference in the help desk shouldn't be too high for a person in a wheelchair, but it also could have a lower section for people who are in wheelchairs. And for the restrooms, they should never be blocked. That's a very bad idea. The stalls should be 5 foot by 5 foot and have grab bars. The pictures should also not be any higher than 48 inches, and the sink should have a push handle or be motion activated. For the website or the virtual spaces, the challenges tend to revolve around whether your website is accessible to screen readers, because a lot of library websites are not. Some solutions for this to make your website more accessible would be to avoid PDFs, to follow the web content accessibility guidelines, and to use alt text to describe images. When creating or editing your website, following these standards would be very helpful and make it where everyone could access your information. If you do not have control over the website, consider discussing it with your library's webmaster and have them run accessibility checkers. For the Virginia Beach Public Library's website, we usually sit at about 83% accessible, and that's usually because of city controls over the look and feel of the website, things such as banners, color contrast, sometimes they are broken or expired links, things like that. However, our webmaster does run regular accessibility checkers, but it typically just sits there because of all the controls. But he does make adjustments to things like font size and, if he can, color contrast to make it as accessible as possible with still staying in the city's guidelines. If you're wondering what alt text is a computer or text a computer or screen reader reads in place of an element it cannot recognize, like a picture or like an image. It is crucial for accessibility purposes. When creating alt text, it's a good idea to be concise and avoid verbosity. Be mindful of the context or the badge. Be descriptive and convey the meaning of the image. And end with a period. It is not necessary to have a title or to say the picture is of an image. For the difficulties encountered with communication disabilities, if you're wondering what a communication disability is specifically, it's a disability that complicates or hinders expression. Some examples could be blindness, deafness, or speech disability. And some solutions to making accommodations and being more accessible would be to provide auxiliary aids, provide alternate ways of expression, and create a welcoming, acceptable space in your library. Communication difficulties are especially prevalent when interacting with customers in person. Some examples of auxiliary aids, if you were curious and you'd like to provide them, would be to provide materials in a variety of formats: large print, braille, electronic, and audio. Provide staff or helpers to serve as qualified readers, note takers, or interpreters. Provide devices with real-time captioning, type to text, or speech-to-speech transitioners, picture cards, or paper and pencil. Some challenges to providing these auxiliary aids is depending on the need. There may be labor, staff, or time intensive. They also may need to be requested ahead of time. So you really need to take those into consideration, but it still makes it very important to provide them. Patrons should feel comfortable expressing themselves and their needs without feeling rushed in your environment. And in order to provide these, a lot of times what's needed is funds and properly trained and available staff. In short, everyone should be able to and feel comfortable accessing your library and its resources. So, how libraries initially responded to the pandemic, it definitely changed what the focus should be on in accessibility, because patrons were not usually allowed to go into the physical space because the library closed its doors to the public and stopped circulating books. Many library systems throughout the country, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. They stopped holding programs in person at the library. They discontinued outreach, and they restricted access to only online resources, which may or may not have also included holds pickup. So rethinking how to be more accessible and inclusive became a pretty big priority because the old ways of thinking were no longer useful. So the challenges faced by libraries, kind of to expand on that, they had to rethink how to provide services. They couldn't rely on past experiences. Accessibility and inclusion took on new meaning. Physical access grew less important because you couldn't enter the library building anymore. So some solutions libraries came up with as a result was to shift programs online using platforms such as Zoom, WebEx, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams. They purchased more digital downloads and increased their digital resources. They also shifted staff to remote work and telework. So essentially, libraries pivoted to still be able to provide services as well as content, but they had to change, and with it, the way they met accessibility changed. So some lessons learned was making programs and services accessible is really important. I know the disability community stressed that prior to the pandemic, but it became even more more important, and it became a bigger focus. So what they ended up doing was providing multiple ways of accessing information, downloadable files, as well as recording live programs. Prior to the pandemic, neither of these was regularly done. This allowed for people to view programs when they had time and the ability, and also to be able to get the information in a different way, such as with the downloadable files for different learners, different abilities, all of that. Providing a link and call-in information. This was especially a big deal for our programs in Virginia Beach, because of a lot of our attendees are older or less tech savvy. Providing both was a wonderful way to engage all of our customers, because the younger generation was very comfortable using the link, but the older, less tech savvy generation really needed and relied upon that call-in information. They also started describing images on slides verbally more often, especially if they're there to portray content. If it's just decoration, it's not 100% necessary, but if it's supposed to, enrich the slide or enrich the presentation, libraries started doing that more, and as well as using closed captions. Some more lessons learned was to be flexible and give customers options. Let them have more of a voice in what the library is providing them. Providing them both physical and ebooks, virtual and in-person programming. Base programs frequency on attendees' needs. For instance, at our library, prior to the pandemic, we had a monthly book club. And after the pandemic, it became a weekly book club. And now it's virtual 3 times a month and in person 1 time a month. And that was all based on what our attendees told us they would like, and told us what they'd feel comfortable doing. And that also kind of feeds into the idea how important social interaction is. The reason the book club essentially went from being monthly to weekly is because a lot of our customers were very isolated with the pandemic, whether it be because of their age or because of their disability or both. So providing a program to them allowed for them to get the social interaction they so desperately craved. It helps to fight feelings of isolation and loneliness. And it's especially a need for those with mobility and transportation challenges, because a lot of our customers are not able to drive. Providing them a program that they could simply call in or log into became very important, because it made it where they could have that interaction whether they were able to get to a physical location or not. So now I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Babak Zarin.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. So Kaitlyn kind of covered all the things that were going on in libraries as before COVID, as COVID sort of started up, and as people began to adapt. But what happened to the community, the disabled community, during COVID? Well, the thing is, the disabled community is at the highest risk pool, always. But the end result was they also happened to be left out of a lot of the messaging, a lot of the planning, a lot of the government programming, because of the need to do all these extra accommodations. Many wound up having major physical and mental health tolls as they lost care and lost caregivers, although many did actually get better care and reconnected with their community as virtual options started to come into existence. The big 2 factors were tech access, your fluency with technology, and economic affluence. So basically computers and cash. People who had both, they could use all those virtual and remote offerings. They were able to remotely volunteer, remotely go to classes. They were able to stay informed about what was going on in the community through calling in, listening, watching the YouTube videos, and so on. But for the patrons who didn't have that, much like the little boy on the left side of the screen, sort of sitting in the dark in the rain all by himself, it was a very hard struggle. There was intense feelings of isolation because they just couldn't get to where everyone was. And that kind of leads to this big question about accessibility after COVID. So the slide right now is a quote by Chris Schwartzman from the article "Normal Didn't Work for Us." The quote reads, "There is a big push to be completely in person. A lot of people that are lower risk are very eager to get back to some normal that they have in their mind, and that normal didn't work for us." And this has been a very big sentiment that's coming out as slowly we emerge from the full pandemic. There's a feeling that all of these accessibility things that were put in place are sort of starting to disappear. And that as people no longer need to take as many precautions, they're kind of becoming unwilling to take them for those within the community who still need it. I know this is a little bit of a timely concern, but recently the CDC changed their masking suggestions. And that's caused a lot of worry about, is it now sort of left to those with disabilities and who are immunocompromised to sort of take on the precautions themselves now that there's more freedom being given? And that's a very big concern. Next slide, please. The reason it's a big concern is because of this lovely little number, which is that about 1 million or 12% of Virginians have a disability. This is a multi-ethnic group. They're kind of equally split gender-wise, according to the US Census. 70% are at least age 65. An additional 11% are between 35 and 65. And it cuts across all kinds of disabilities: hearing, seeing, cognitive, ambulatory, or sometimes known as like moving disabilities. There's a lot, and all of these people still need a lot of these accommodations. And they're only going to increase. So this is the number that you hear a lot. Older people will outnumber children in 9 years. Those of you who are a bit more exacting may have heard sort of popularly that the number of people over the age of 65 will outnumber below in about, I guess, 12 years now. About 10,000 people turn 65 every day. 91% of those over 65 have at least one chronic disease. 73%, or about 3/4, have at least two. And all of that does not include COVID itself. COVID is considered a cultural trauma. So there's a lot of disabilities that are kicking up from that. Long haul COVID, PSAS COVID-19, has been marked by the government as potentially qualifying you for accommodations under the ADA, and upwards of 1/3 of COVID cases can result in long haul COVID. So all of that put together means you're going to see more and more that the people who want to be doing stuff at the library, the people giving services, people using services, are going to need accommodations because it's just going to increase. And what gradually, of course. And in turn, that means you can't just not offer the services that you were using during COVID. Those services addressed a lot of people's needs because for a very brief time, everybody was sort of living the life of someone with some degree of disability. So you're going to want to keep some. The big question, of course, is how do you choose what to continue? And I'm going to be kind of upfront. I wish I had a glorious red line. Here's the stuff to keep document for you, but I don't. This is a conversation that within your libraries and your library systems, it really sort of falls to you to be looking at and measuring and evaluating. What I can offer you, though, are these 5 guiding questions to help you make those decisions. So the first question is, what does normal mean to you? right? A lot of people talk about, I want to go back to normal. I'm looking forward to the new normal. But what is that exactly? At what point, when you look around or move around your library and are talking and engaging with people, will you feel that, yeah, this is what I'm expecting? That kind of goes into the second question of how COVID has changed your librarianship, whether you like those changes or not. If you were someone who before were doing children's story times in person and you've spent the past couple of years doing them virtually, do you want to continue doing those virtually? If you don't, maybe you're one of those people who hates the sound of their voice, but it's clear that this is now a thing. There may be conversations to be had about how you're going to continue doing that. Likewise, if you're someone who really loved having the kids run around, well, after 2 years, they may not be as loud or as much running around or as easily engaging with stuff. And there may be things you'll need to offer to sort of help them learn those skill sets as well. What aspects of health might your library need to learn more about? There's a lot going on, and some of this is completely new to people. So there may be things about emotional health or physical health, whether it's about COVID or the responses to it, that as a library, your staff may want to learn more about so that you can sort of figure out how you're going to balance all of these. And then, of course, the evaluation and support questions, right? How are you going to evaluate these services? How are you going to support staff? A lot of these services may have made sense when you had tons of people. If you're in a smaller department now, you may have to check, how can we do this without overwhelming anybody? There may be training that needs to be done. Those are just a few aspects. I could go for a very long time on all 5 of these questions, and I'm happy to go into that depth during the conversation period. But just to sort of start here, these 5 can help you sort of approach this question of, what is life going to look like now? What are the things we want to be thinking of, not just in the short term, but in the long term as our population grows and changes? Now that's sort of the end of our speaking section. Again, this is the brief pause that'll be coming up shortly. It's a 1-minute pause. So during that minute, there will be a visual cue and an audio cue to help you keep track of that time, but feel free to do what you need to do in order to get up and then come back to the conversation full focused. And that was our 1-minute pause. I hope you were able to stretch it out as you needed to do. And now we're in our conversation period, our questions and questions session. So if you have any questions for Kaitlyn or I, feel free to ask, and we'll do the best we can to discuss and maybe even have a few answers for you.
Thank you so much to Babak and Kaitlyn for being here with us today and for presenting. And thank you to everyone for attending our webinar. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the speakers or the conference hosts within the Whova app. and an evaluation is provided with the conference session resources. And we welcome your feedback about this session as well as the conference. So thank you for making the 2022 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference a success, and we will see you all next year.